She kept her hands visible the entire time. That was the first thing Lieutenant Marcus Webb noticed when he reviewed the body cam footage later. Every movement announced. Every reach described out loud before it happened. Textbook compliance. Textbook everything. And they still put her face against the hood of a police cruiser on a Tuesday afternoon in front of 43 witnesses and a working traffic camera. What Officer Webb didn't know then, what none of them knew, was that the woman they were handcuffing had spent 31 years earning the right to give orders to 3,000 soldiers at once. That the 4 silver stars on her dress uniform represented something most Americans never see in a lifetime. That she had survived 2 combat deployments, a Senate confirmation hearing, and a Pentagon budget war that would have broken most men in half. And that she had a phone call she hadn't made yet. One call, the kind that doesn't ring twice. Greenville, South Carolina, 3:47 p.m. on a Wednesday in October. General Adrienne Cole was driving herself for the first time in 4 years. No aide in the passenger seat. No military plates on the rental car. No uniform pressed and hanging in the back seat. Just a woman in civilian clothes, gray slacks, a cream blouse, pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother, driving a silver Hyundai Sonata from the airport to the hotel where she would deliver the keynote address at the South Carolina Women in Leadership Summit the following morning. She had insisted on the rental. Her aide, Captain Joshua Reeves, had argued against it for 20 minutes. "Ma'am, at least let me drive. Ma'am, we can arrange a car service. Ma'am, it's protocol." Protocol. Adrienne had smiled at that word. She'd helped write the protocol. "No," she'd said simply, "I want to drive." She hadn't explained why. She didn't need to explain to anyone. Not anymore. But the truth was this. She hadn't driven herself anywhere in so long that she'd started to feel like a passenger in her own life. She wanted the steering wheel under her hands. She wanted to choose her own route, her own music, her own speed. She wanted, just for 90 minutes, to be a woman driving a car. She was thinking about the speech she'd deliver tomorrow, specifically about the 3rd section, the part where she talked about invisible labor. About all the work black women do that never gets counted because no one is watching when they do it. She was rolling the sentences around in her mind, testing their weight, when she saw the police cruisers blocking 2 lanes of Hillside Avenue. A checkpoint. She eased off the accelerator. She'd seen them before, in neighborhoods like this one, positioned on the invisible line where Greenville's predominantly black East Side neighborhood met the wealthier, wider commercial corridor that fed into downtown. She'd grown up understanding these borders, even when they weren't marked on any map. She rolled her window down before anyone approached. Officer Derek Stanton reached her car first. Late 30s, broad-shouldered, a jaw that looked like it was always ready to argue about something. He swept his flashlight across the interior of the car, even though it was mid-afternoon and there was nothing to illuminate. License and registration. Not good afternoon. Not ma'am. Not may I see. Just a command delivered to the windshield. Adrienne reached slowly for her purse on the passenger seat. "Of course," she said. "I'll just reach into my bag here. I didn't ask for a narration." She paused, looked at him, kept her voice completely level. "Officer, I was trained to announce my movements during a traffic stop. I'm trying to cooperate with you." I said I didn't ask for commentary. Stanton's partner, Officer Russell Daines, had appeared on the passenger side. He was younger. His eyes moved across her in that particular way she had learned to recognize over a lifetime. The appraisal, the calculation, deciding what category she belonged in. She handed her driver's license through the window. Stanton took it without looking at her. "Where are you coming from?" "The airport. I flew in from Washington." "Washington." Stanton repeated the word like it didn't quite add up. "This your car?" "It's a rental. I have the agreement in the glove compartment." "Don't touch the glove compartment." "Of course." She kept both hands on the steering wheel. He walked back to his cruiser with her license. Adrienne watched in the rearview mirror. She noted the checkpoint's position. She noted the cars ahead of her that had been waved through without stopping. She counted the ones behind her that were being flagged down. She had been doing this kind of counting her entire adult life. Stanton came back. He leaned his forearm on the roof of her car. Says here your address is in Arlington, Virginia. That's correct. Long way from home. I'm here for a conference. What conference? The South Carolina Women in Leadership Summit. I'm delivering the keynote address tomorrow morning. Stanton looked at her for a moment with an expression that she had no other word for except contemptuous. That right. Step out of the vehicle, ma'am. May I ask why? Checkpoint compliance. Step out. Adrienne understood the law precisely. She had testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee about the law. She knew what checkpoints could and couldn't do, knew what checkpoint compliance did and didn't mean as a legal concept. But she also knew that explaining that to Officer Stanton on the shoulder of Hillside Avenue was not how this was going to resolve itself. Not today. Not here. She opened the door, stepped out, kept her hands visible. Is there a particular reason for the additional screening? You're asking a lot of questions for someone going through a routine checkpoint. I'm trying to understand what I've done wrong. Stanton stepped closer. Not close enough to be physical yet, but close enough to make the point. You haven't done anything wrong, ma'am. Yet. But we've had a lot of vehicles coming through this corridor from that direction. He gestured vaguely toward the east side, that haven't been entirely above board. So when I see a rental car, no local plates, unfamiliar face, I ask questions. That's my job. I understand your job, Officer Stanton. Something shifted in his face. How do you know my name? Your badge. He looked at her badge, then at her. Then his jaw set. Daines. Check the vehicle. I do not consent to a vehicle search. Ma'am. The word had become something different in his mouth. Something with a serrated edge. This is a lawful checkpoint with broad authority under state law. You can consent, or you can make this harder for yourself. It's really that simple. I know the case law on checkpoint searches. Adrienne kept her voice absolutely even. You need individualized suspicion for a vehicle search, even at a checkpoint. You haven't articulated any. Stanton laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind of laugh designed to be a weapon. He looked back at Daines. You hear this? She knows the case law. I'm simply explaining my rights. Your rights. Stanton shook his head slowly, with the weariness of a man who had run out of patience for people like her. Lady, your rights are whatever I say they are until you're out of my checkpoint. You understand that? No, Adrienne said quietly. I don't understand that. Because that's not accurate. The air changed. What happened in the next 90 seconds would be reviewed frame by frame in 7 different federal proceedings over the following 4 months. Turn around, Stanton said. Hands behind your back. I haven't done anything. Turn around. Officer Stanton, I am complying under protest. I want you to note for your body cam record that I am complying voluntarily and that I have not been informed of any charges against me. The handcuffs went on too tight. She registered the pain precisely, noted it, filed it. Obstruction of a lawful checkpoint, Stanton said, close to her ear. And resisting a peace officer. You want to keep talking back? We can add more. Adrienne said nothing. She was counting. Not just violations. Not just witnesses. She was counting something else. The minutes until she could make her call. Greenville Police Department, District 4 Precinct. 4:31 p.m. The booking officer's name was Sergeant Clarence Holt. He'd been doing intake for 11 years and prided himself on having seen everything. He hadn't seen everything. He typed her name into the system. Adrienne Cole. Date of birth. Arlington, Virginia address. And then, because it was routine, he ran a secondary verification through the federal database. The results came back in 6 seconds. Holt stared at the screen. He ran it again. Same result. He picked up his desk phone and called the watch commander. In a holding area, Adrienne sat on a metal bench with her hands resting on her knees. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency that suggested someone had once been annoyed by silence and decided to do something permanent about it. A drunk man 2 cells over snored at a volume that seemed optimistic. She wasn't thinking about the bench or the lights or the snoring. She was thinking about the phone call she needed to make. The one call. She'd been deciding since the moment the cuffs clicked shut exactly who to dial. Not her personal attorney, though he was good. Not her aide, though Reeves would already be alarmed by her silence. Not her husband in Arlington, though Marcus would want to know. She was going to call one person. She'd rehearsed it in her head the entire ride to the station. For sentences. That was all it would take. For sentences, and the machinery would start moving. And once it started moving, not Stanton, not the watch commander, not the mayor of Greenville would be able to stop it. But first she needed to give the system exactly enough rope. Captain Vincent Pryor was the watch commander. 51 years old. 23 years on the force. He'd built his career on a reputation for being unflappable. He walked into the booking area, trying to look unflappable and failing. He pulled Holt aside. "Tell me you're wrong. Ran it twice, Captain." Pryor looked through the narrow window at the woman sitting on the bench. She sat with the posture of someone who had once had a professional reason to sit that way and had never stopped. Back straight, chin level, hands visible. Who brought her in? Stanton and Daines. Checkpoint on Hillside. Pryor closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. "Give me the body cam footage from both of them. Now, before anyone else touches it." Then he walked into the holding area. "Ms. Cole," he said. She looked at him without changing her expression. "General Cole," she said. Not with heat, just as a correction. Pryor felt something drop in his stomach. "General Cole," he said carefully. "I'm Captain Vincent Pryor, watch commander. I'd like to get you out of there and into a room where we could talk. I'd like my one phone call." "Of course. We can. I'd like it now." He nodded, led her to a desk near his office. Desk phone. She picked it up and dialed from memory. A number with a Washington area code that Pryor didn't recognize. She held the receiver to her ear and looked at the wall. For sentences. He heard them clearly. He would remember them for the rest of his life. "This is General Adrienne Cole, United States Army, service number 784-40-2291. I am currently detained at the Greenville Police Department District 4 Precinct in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm invoking Army Regulation 600 to 20 Incident Protocol and requesting deployment of the Army Inspector General Response Team." Pause. Authorization code. Kilo Sierra 774. She hung up. Pryor stared at her. "What exactly," he said slowly, "did you just do?" "I made my phone call," she said. "You have about 40 minutes before people start arriving." Here is what officers Derek Stanton and Russell Daines did not know about the woman they had handcuffed on Hillside Avenue. They didn't know that Adrienne Cole had graduated first in her class from West Point in 1992, that she had served in Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom, and had been awarded the Distinguished Service Medal, the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Legion of Merit with 3 oak leaf clusters, and 17 other commendations that would require a full page to list. They didn't know that she currently commanded the United States Army Forces Command at Fort Liberty, North Carolina, a position that made her responsible for the readiness of approximately 750,000 soldiers, one of the largest operational commands in the American military. They didn't know that she served on the Army staff, that she had testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee on 4 separate occasions, that the Secretary of Defense had her personal cell phone number and used it. They didn't know that for the past 14 months, she had been working quietly with the Army Inspector General's office on a classified review of racially discriminatory policing practices in municipalities adjacent to major military installations. A review sparked by the documented targeting of black soldiers off post. A review that had collected incident reports from 847 active duty service members across 11 states. They didn't know that Greenville's Hillside Avenue checkpoint had appeared in 43 of those reports. They didn't know that she had requested this speaking engagement specifically because it would put her in Greenville, that she had driven herself specifically to create an unescorted civilian encounter, that she had declined military plates and an aide specifically so that the encounter would be clean, unambiguous, impossible to dismiss. They didn't know that everything they'd said was recorded on Stanton's body cam, Daines' body cam, the checkpoint's fixed camera, and the dash cam for a passing city bus that hadn't been erased yet. And they didn't know that in 41 minutes, 2 black SUVs and 1 Army staff car were going to pull into the District 4 precinct parking lot. But Captain Pryor was starting to figure it out. He sat across from General Cole in his office with the body cam footage pulled up on his laptop. He watched it 3 times. By the 3rd time, the color had left his face in stages, like a tide going out. She articulated her rights 6 times. He said, more to himself than to her. 7, Adrienne corrected. He clicked back. Counted. 7, he confirmed. He closed the laptop. Looked at her. General Cole, I need to know what's about to walk through my door. Representatives from the Army Inspector General's office, she said. A JAG officer who will be documenting everything for the evidentiary record. And depending on how quickly my aide can get from the hotel, probably Captain Reeves, who has already contacted the Department of Justice liaison in this district. Pryor put his hands flat on his desk. I want you to understand something, he said. Officers Stanton and Daines acted outside of what I would have authorized. I know, she said. They've had complaints before. I know that too. She opened her purse. They'd returned it, unopened, when Pryor brought her out of holding and removed a small notebook. She set it on the desk. 7 complaints in the past 2 years against Officer Stanton. For against Officer Daines. All closed at the supervisory level. 3 of the 7 against Stanton were filed by military personnel stationed at Shaw Air Force Base. Pryor looked at the notebook, then at her. You've been building this case for 14 months. And today was the final piece of evidence, she said. What they did on Hillside Avenue is precisely what 43 service members describe happening to them. To me, it happened with video from 4 angles, audio from 2 microphones, and 43 witnesses from the cars behind me who were already being contacted by my office. She paused. I tried to stop them, she said. Not with anger. With something quieter and heavier than anger. 7 times. I told them my name. I explained the case law. I complied with every lawful order and questioned every unlawful one. And they put me on the hood of a car anyway, because the only thing they heard was a black woman talking back. The room was quiet for a moment. What happens now? Pryor asked. Now, General Cole said, we find out what this department is made of. The watch commander's office had a window that looked out over the precinct parking lot. Pryor stood at it more times than he could count in the next 38 minutes. He had officers Stanton and Daines brought into separate interview rooms. He assigned desk officers to do nothing but log every piece of footage from the checkpoint encounter. He called the police chief's cell phone and said 4 words, "You need to come in." Stanton sat in interview room 2 with his arms crossed. He had been told only that there was an issue with his arrest from the checkpoint. He assumed it was the usual, someone claiming their rights had been violated. He'd been through it before. A woman who knew the case law, probably a paralegal, maybe a law student, some professional activist who spent her weekends making police work difficult. He wasn't worried. He would be. Daines was in interview room 3. He was younger and therefore more accurately calibrated to the situation's potential gravity. He'd watched the footage on his personal phone during the drive-in. He'd watched it twice. By the time he sat down in the interview room, his knee was bouncing under the table. Captain Pryor's desk phone rang at 5:17 p.m. He answered it. Captain Pryor. The voice on the other end was precise and unhurried in the way of someone who had spent decades giving orders in high-stakes environments. This is Brigadier General Marcus Webb, Army Inspector General's office. My team is 3 minutes out. I'd appreciate the courtesy of someone meeting us at the entrance. Of course, Pryor said. Of course. He hung up, stood, put on his jacket, walked out of his office to where General Adrienne Cole was sitting in a chair beside his assistant's desk, drinking a cup of coffee that Pryor's assistant had brought her with trembling hands after learning, via the whisper network that travels at the speed of light through any law enforcement building, exactly who their guest was. They're here, Pryor said. She nodded, set down her coffee cup, stood. She smoothed her blouse, straightened her pearl earrings. Then let's get started, she said. The conference room at District 4 Precinct seated 14 people. That evening it seated 19, with 4 more standing against the wall. Brigadier General Marcus Webb ran the room with the efficiency of a man who had no patience for theater and even less for delay. His team had already pulled the checkpoint footage from the city traffic system before they walked through the door. His JAG officer had already reviewed the arrest report that Stanton had filed, the report that described Adrienne Cole as uncooperative and combative, and noted that she had refused to identify herself when asked. A report that the body cam footage contradicted on 9 separate points. General Cole sat at the head of the table. She had declined Pryor's offer to sit elsewhere. It had not been a dramatic choice. She had simply sat down at the head of the table because she was the senior officer in the room, and that was where the senior officer sat. Police Chief Sandra Okafor had arrived 11 minutes after the Army vehicles. She was a compact woman in her late 50s who had spent 30 years building a career in law enforcement and who had the particular expression of someone watching everything they'd built potentially coming apart at the seams. She sat 3 chairs from General Cole and said very little for the first 20 minutes. Webb began with the footage, all 4 angles. The room watched in near silence. When it ended, Webb set down his pen. General Cole, can you walk us through the violations you documented? She opened her notebook. She had started the list the moment they put her in the back of the cruiser. She went through it methodically. Checkpoint stop initiated without legal basis under current South Carolina checkpoint statute. No consent obtained or waived before vehicle search initiated. Miranda rights not provided prior to custody. Excessive force applied during handcuffing. She held up her wrists, where the red marks had deepened to bruising over the past 2 hours. 7 requests for identification ignored. False statements in the arrest report, specifically the notation that she had refused to identify herself, contradicted by body cam footage at timestamps 4 minutes and 17 seconds and again at 6 minutes and 2 seconds. She continued for 9 minutes. When she finished, the room was quiet in the particular way that rooms get quiet when everyone present understands that they're watching the future being determined. Chief Okafor spoke. General Cole. Her voice was measured, professional, and carried something underneath that Adrienne recognized as genuine distress. I want you to know that what happened today does not reflect the policies of this department. Chief Okafor, Adrienne said carefully. With respect, it reflects the practice, which is different from the policy. Your policy says officers will follow the law. The practice, documented in 43 incidents over 14 months, is that black drivers in this corridor are subjected to enhanced enforcement, extended detention, and when they assert their rights, they are arrested. Officer Stanton has done this before. The difference today is that I had 4 cameras and an Army Inspector General standing by. Chief Okafor absorbed this. Webb set a folder on the table. The Army Inspector General's office is prepared to refer this matter to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division for a formal investigation into the Greenville Police Department's checkpoint program. He paused. However, General Cole has indicated she would like to give this department the opportunity to respond first. Every head turned to Adrienne. She looked at Chief Okafor directly. I don't want this department destroyed, she said. I want it fixed. Those are 2 different operations. She set her notebook on the table. Here's what I'm asking for. Immediate suspension without pay for Officers Stanton and Daines pending a full disciplinary hearing. An independent audit of every checkpoint arrest in this corridor for the past 3 years. A mandatory review of complaint dismissal procedures. And a publicly documented reform plan submitted to my office and the DOJ within 60 days. She paused. If those things happen, we work together. If they don't, the DOJ investigation proceeds without our cooperation, and this department discovers what it's like to be under a federal consent decree for the next decade. Chief Okafor looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Agreed, she said. All of it. Stanton found out the truth at 6:04 p.m. A detective he didn't know walked into interview room 2, set a printed document on the table, and left without speaking. Stanton looked down at it. It was a Department of Army biography. Official. Formatted with the Army seal at the top. Cole, Adrienne Lynn. General, U.S. Army. Commander, United States Army Forces Command. The list of commendations ran to 22 lines. He read it twice. When the detective came back to collect him, Stanton was sitting with both hands flat on the table, staring at the document. His face had the particular quality of someone who had just understood, all at once, and without the mercy of gradual comprehension, exactly how badly they had miscalculated. Across the hall, Daines had been given the same document 15 minutes earlier. He had asked, quietly, whether it was too late to request legal counsel. It was not too late, but it was also not going to help in the way he hoped. The press conference was held the following morning at 9 a.m. on the steps of Greenville City Hall. General Adrienne Cole stood at the podium in her dress uniform. 4 silver stars on each shoulder, 22 years of commendations in neat rows on her chest. She had considered wearing the cream blouse again. She had decided against it. Today the uniform was necessary, not for herself, for the statement that needed to be made clearly enough that it could not be misread. Chief Okafor stood to her left. General Webb stood to her right. Before she spoke, Adrienne looked out at the assembled crowd. Reporters, camera crews, a cluster of community members who had been at the checkpoint yesterday, who had watched from their cars and filmed on their phones, and some of whom had. Afterward, driven to the precinct and waited for 3 hours in the parking lot because they needed to see what happened next. And in the front row, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 22, wearing scrubs like she'd come straight from a hospital shift, holding a phone with a cracked screen. Adrienne recognized her. She had been 3 cars behind the silver Sonata at the checkpoint. She had filmed the whole thing. She had posted it with a caption that read, "They did this to her. They do this to us. Every day." Adrienne held that woman's eyes for a moment. Then she spoke. "Yesterday afternoon," she began, "I was stopped at a police checkpoint on Hillside Avenue in this city. I was driving a rental car in civilian clothes. I was stopped because of how I look. I was handcuffed because I asked questions. I was arrested because Officer Derek Stanton decided that a black woman who asserted her rights was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected." She paused. "I am a 4-star general. I have served this country for 31 years. I command 750,000 soldiers. Those facts are not why what happened to me was wrong." She let that settle. What happened to me was wrong because it was wrong. Because 43 soldiers in my command reported the same experience and nothing changed. Because the woman 3 cars behind me has probably experienced some version of this herself and didn't have a phone call to make. Because the law applies to everyone or it applies to no one, and right now in this city, it has not been applying to everyone. She looked down at her notes, then set them aside. Officers Stanton and Daines are suspended. A full investigation is underway. Chief Okafor has committed to reforms that my office will monitor directly. These are the beginnings of accountability, not the end of it. She held the podium. I did not come to Greenville to make an example of 2 police officers. I came because this city kept showing up in reports that broke my heart, and I needed to understand why. She looked out at the crowd again. Now I do, and now we get to work. The South Carolina Women in Leadership Summit had rescheduled her keynote for the following spring. She gave it, standing at the podium in the same conference center where she'd been supposed to speak the morning after her arrest. Adrienne Cole looked out at 400 women and began with a story that wasn't in the notes she'd prepared the first time around. "I used to think," she said, "that the moment I'd made it would be when I didn't have to announce myself anymore. Well, I could walk through a door and be recognized on my own terms." She paused. "I was wrong about that. The moment I made it had nothing to do with recognition. It was the moment I understood that I wasn't fighting for recognition. I was fighting so that the woman behind me in line wouldn't have to fight at all. In the audience, Captain Joshua Reeves, her aide, who had driven 4 hours the night of her arrest and waited in the parking lot and cried once in his car and then gone back to being professional, was sitting in the third row. He was taking notes, the way she taught him to. Officers Stanton and Daines had been terminated. Their dismissals were upheld on appeal. The Department of Justice had opened a formal investigation into Greenville's checkpoint program. 14 other officers were under review. The checkpoint on Hillside Avenue had been decommissioned. Chief Okafor was still chief. She had submitted her reform plan 47 days after the press conference, 13 days early. General Cole's office had reviewed it and provided written recommendations. The two women had spoken 4 times since then. It was not a friendship exactly, but it was something that might become one. The young woman in the scrubs, whose name turned out to be Janelle Pickens, had posted the video to 3 platforms and watched it reach 40 million views in 96 hours. She was now enrolled in a pre-law program at the University of South Carolina. General Cole had written her a letter of recommendation, and the case built from 14 months of work, from 847 incident reports from 43 soldiers and 43 complaints, and one Tuesday afternoon on Hillside Avenue. That case was now a 90-page document in the hands of a federal judge in the Fourth Circuit. It wasn't over. These things were never over. Adrienne Cole had been doing this work long enough to understand that justice was not a destination. It was a direction. You kept moving in it, and you measured the ground you'd covered, and you handed the map to whoever was walking behind you. She stood at the podium in the spring sunlight and thought about her mother's pearl earrings, about the first time she'd worn a uniform, about the weight of handcuffs on her wrists and the cold metal of a car hood and the sound of a young officer laughing like her rights were a joke someone had told him once. She thought about the phone call, for sentences, the machinery starting to move. She thought about what Janelle Pickens had written in her application essay to the pre-law program. One line that Adrienne had read 3 times standing at her kitchen counter in Arlington. She didn't run. She didn't beg. She just made the call. Adrienne Cole looked out at 400 women and continued her speech. There was a lot of work left to do. She had already started. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that quiet strength and documentation defeat loud injustice every single time. Subscribe for more stories of accountability, courage, and the long, necessary work of equal justice under law.